Okay, today we talk about shells and RDE project, which I make on top of guix and guix home. I'm Andrew Tropin, and let's start from shell history. Most of the time, talking about shells, we mean Unix shells. It's a very broad term, and basically almost everything that communicate with operating system kernel in modern operating systems is a shell. It's a very basic and fundamental mechanism, and probably the first thing that you face in Unix or GNU Linux operating systems. And it has a very long story, and first of the shells that appeared was shell written by Ken Thompson, probably more than 50 years ago, or around something around this date. And it was a default shell for first 6 versions of Unix. And later, newer and more featureful version of shells appeared. And after that, all descendants of those shells called Unix shells. There's no strict definition of such thing. There is no standard for Unix shells, but in most cases, people means by Unix shell something that provide you with CLI or command line interface and allows to interact with the kernel of the operating system. Obviously, it should be Unix-like operating system, otherwise it won't be a Unix shell. And a little later, Bourne shell appeared, written by some guy, Stephen Bourne, at the same organization, and it was used for Unix since version 7. And after that, much more dissidents of this shell appeared, and they have a lot of different features, but most probably well known is bash. It's a born again shell written by GNU project and probably most widespread shell currently. But there are a lot more different shells that used in different distributions, different BSD operating systems, and different Unix systems. One of more noticeable shells is Korn shell, because it's one of the shells that conforms and which is a fundamental for POSIX standardization. POSIX is a standard describing different operating system mechanisms, syscalls, how the operating system works with threads, and also it describes the shell. Shell basically is consists of two parts: the language, which allows to write some scripts, and the command line interface that you can use interactively. And guix is a basis for POSIX standard describing how shell language should look like. Knowing all of this, we can now be sure that every POSIX complaint operating system should have some shell which is compatible with Korn shell. And bash has a special mod in which it is compatible with Korn shell, and many other shells have this mod too. Yep, I think it's enough of history. Obviously, we have some other shells, which, for example, Emacs shell, which is not what we mean by Unix shells in most cases. For example, Emacs shell uses Lisp for programming, not anything close to Bash or any other Unix shell syntaxes. Also, there are more modern shells, which we can call Unix shells. For example, Fish. It's a shell, very modern, feature-rich shell that not POSIX shell, but very Unix shell, because it allows to do everything that you can do with any other shells. Actually, no, probably I can't increase volume because it's on the maximum. I can bring the microphone a little closer. I hope it will help. Okay, and we won't be covering all those shells and REPLs in details. We will talk about two most widespread and important shells. Right now it's Bash and zshrc. You're welcome. And probably you're all familiar with shell. You can write some commands, you can pipe those commands and so on, go to different directories and do all the other stuff. I won't be covering it because I hope everyone is already familiar with it. What is interesting about shells is how they started, and it's quite complex process actually, especially in modern shells. And here you can see few different types of shells and can see what configuration files they use in this table. And you can see that in each cell it can be login, int for interactive, or interactive non-login, or any other values. And what those values means we will cover very soon. First of all, you always can look at the manual and find somewhere, probably at the end, a page describing the startup process. Probably I scrolled too fast. Okay, I can look for profile, and here we will see files related to Bash shell, and somewhere here, oh, okay, invocation. The invocation section describes the startup process of the shell and which configuration files it reads. And the same information you can find on Wikipedia and also on Arch Linux Wiki. It also has pretty decent information about it. And talking about Bash, you can see that there are a few files here. Actually, there is not all files mentioned here. Let's go to Arch Wiki, and here, okay, here you can see all the files that will be used for startup in Bash. And I think the most up-to-date information will be always in manual. And very interesting that depending on the mod in which the shell is run, it will read different startup files. And let's discuss which mod it can be run in. For example, if you only login on your TTI, your terminal, virtual terminal device, it will spawn a login shell. Login shell means that it's a first application after login, and it will get a special argument and will be able to detect itself as a login shell. Also, you can spawn a login shell with a special flag like --login. You can see it right here actually, and it will start reading system-wide configuration called etc profile. And let's take a look at the content of etc profile, and you will see that it contains quite a lot of lines here, because guix operating system heavily relies on environment variables for making different software available to the user, and that is why it needs to set up a lot of different variables before providing interactive shell to the user. And you can see here that it sets some passes to manuals and to info pages and to other stuff. Also, it sources system profile, which also contains a lot of variables like pass variable and also manual and info variables, which will provide a user with all system software. In different operating systems, it can contain different commands, but for guix, it sets up system profile, some environment variables, and later it will set up a user's profile right here. Actually, user have two profiles, guix profile and config guix current. First one it contains only guix utility, and the second one contains all the packages installed by user. Yep, and after that, it reads etc bash rc file, which contains maybe some other necessary stuff, but for our use case, we won't be looking at it because it mostly system-wide configuration for interactive shells. Interactive shells is clear from the name, is something for user to interact with. For example, spawning a new terminal, we will get an interactive shell here. We can type commands, get results, set something, remove something, or anything else. But you can run a shell without interacting with it. For example, when you run shell scripts, you type sh and the pass to the script, type enter or return, and get this script read and evaluated, and you not interact with shell at the moment. And after the script is finished, the shell will exit, and you won't touch it. That's non-interactive shell, which you can't interact with it. Okay. After profile read, it will happen only for login shells. For example, if you spawn shell here, it won't read etc profile because it's a non-login interactive shell. And it's done to prevent, for example, duplicates or redefinition of the variables. You can see here that I define info pass like something plus the previous value of info pass. If I will be running this on every shell invocation, I will have a lot of duplicates in those variables. And if I will start a shell from here and will start it again and will start it again, it will get too much duplicates in those variables. But our etc profile read only once for only login shell. Okay, let's go to the next configuration file, is bash profile. It's based in our home directory and serves the same purpose of etc profile, but it's user specific. It will be run only for user that have it. And if there is no bash profile file, it will read . Profile. same as etc profile, but user specific. That means that other users won't get any values from these files in their shells. And also important file that will be loaded after bash profile file is bashrc. Bashrc is file which will be evaluated for non-login interactive shells. That means that if you want to have a content of bashrc file in your login shell, you need to source it manually from bash profile or from etc profile. You can do it from etc profile, that is why you need to do it from bash profile. And let's take a look at bash profile generated by guix system. I slightly modified it, but you can see that at the end of the file, at the beginning of the file, it contains, if there is a bashrc file, then source it, like read and evaluate and get all the values from bashrc. And let's take a look at bashrc file. It contains few more customizations, like it making ls to be colorful and so on. And for each new spawn shell, it will be run every time. And to check it, we can do the following trick. Let's take a bashrc file and we'll do let's create a variable called test variable, and we'll assign a value equal to test var plus something plus like that. And now I will open your terminal and let's grep for test variable. Nothing. Okay. Maybe. And now we can see that we have this variable assigned to this value, but if we run our shell again, we will see that it contains two values. And we can spawn more shells. They all nested, and depending on the nestedness, it will increase the number of eyes in this variable. It is because every time we spawn interactive shells, they inherit all the variables from the place where they were spawned and evaluate bashrc one more time. I hope now it's clear why people invented two different not too many different startup files, and what's the difference between profile files and RC files. There are not so much sense in the naming, it's just legacy. Nothing special about this profile, not so much special about RC. Back in the time it was for run command, and now it's just for fun, I will say. The same situation is for zshrc, which is another shell which can emulate POSIX shell, and it have more features than bash, but also it very different in startup process. It have a new very interesting file called zshrc, which used mostly for setting environment variables, and it will be evaluated on each run of each shell. Despite the purpose of this shell, it can be login, it can be interactive, it can be non-interactive, it will be run every time. Talking about different modes of shells, we already discussed that if the shell is the first program after login, it will be a login shell, and if it has minus login arguments, it's also a login shell. In other cases, it's a non-login shell. Login shells read profile files, and for zshrc it will be z profile. For bash it will be /etc/profile and .bash profile respectively. And that's all about the difference between login and non-login shells. Also, shell can be interactive and non-interactive. For example, if you can type something in the shell, it's interactive shell. If it runs some script, it's probably non-interactive shell. And it can be run in compatibility mode. If, for example, your shell linked to /bin/sh, you will see that I have bash linked to /bin/sh, and if I will be using /bin/sh, it will be running bash in compatibility mode and will try to mimic the behavior of POSIX shell as close as possible. And it allows to make portable scripts for different POSIX compatible systems which have different shell implementations, but if all those shell implementations POSIX complained, the script will be portable and will launch on all those systems. Also, you probably can run bash or any other shell in compatibility mode with special flag, but you can read it in the manual. Okay, about configurations and startup process we talked a lot, and we already looked at this pretty table which contains a lot of files. Not all of them, but a lot of files. For example, for zshrc, you see they are very different from what we have for bash and what we have for guix, but in some compatibility mode those files will be used. For example, zshrc will read etc profile and dot profile in compatibility mode, and the same for other shells. In compatibility mode they will try to be as POSIX as possible. And to make it clear what type of file you want to use for storing your configurations, in most cases it should be .zshrc for your customizations, or bashrc, .bashrc in case you use bash, because it's a user-specific settings, and they should be run only for interactive shells. But in some rare cases, setting some variables that should be set only once on first login, you can use profile or z profile for zshrc, and some variables that have to be set every time for each shell, you can use zshenv, and there is no alternative for bash for such file. And also the zlogin and zlogout, also a bash logout scripts that probably only for advanced usage, and you will learn about those files only in case you really need them. The rule of thumb: prefer dot files to global files, prefer zshrc to all other files, but if you know that you need to set environment variables for all the different shells, different modes of shells you can use. Use zshrc and something very global, which should be run only on login, you set in the profile. For example, setting sourcing guix profile, you have to source guix profiles in z profile or bash profile files. Okay, I think that's all for today about startup process, and let's go to a small announcement. We already made a lot of work on guix home, and we are ready to call for few people who will start using it with our support. We will be supporting them in mailing lists, and we'll make a call to make sure that the setup works, and you will see a full complete announcement probably today, few hours later. Okay, and let's go to RDE part. And let's start from what RDE is. Actually, I had quite a lot of experience with different GNU Linux distributions, and probably around mostly 20 years, I think, of experience with it, and I was quite happy with Gentoo Linux. It was very flexible, very interesting, but when I switched to a new computer, I had to do all the configurations one more time. I could save some of the configurations and transfer them to the new host, but still had a lot of manual work to set everything up. Same works for Arch Linux, LFS, and other stuff, and it's especially painful when you have two different hosts that you need to manage. And even sometime after maybe 10 years of usage experience, I tired of manual configuring all that stuff and decided to go more with the distribution with a better reasonable defaults, with some reasonable defaults, maybe not better. It was not so flexible, but I didn't have to configure it every time. Just pretty easy installation process, and you already can use it for solving your problems. It was not the pleasant experience, but sometimes it was pretty good. Such approach not so flexible as previous one, but requires much less configuration and involvement from my side. But funny that I can get both benefits, both flexibility and reasonable defaults, maybe very reasonable and very good defaults, by having one interesting property of such distribution is reproducibility. And with Nixos and guix, it became possible to describe the whole operating system and get the working distribution from just this configuration, and you can keep any configuration in those files, and they can migrate to new host easily, and can be synchronized between two different hosts, which is pretty cool. And it's solved almost all of my problems, and now I just need to write only one configuration. There are another small problem with guix. It doesn't have a tool for managing user space software. You can manage only system software with guix system subcommand, and that is why we started implementing guix home utility. And on top of this utility, I maintain my own config, and I call it RDE, reproducible development environment, or reasonable defaults. And one part of this RDE configuration is zshrc configuration, and I will demonstrate a few examples of the usage. But first, let's talk about principles that I decided to be primary for this configuration. The shell should be pretty fast, snappy, and it should be very close to Emacs experience to easily switch between shell and my Emacs. That means same or nearly the same key bindings, same behavior with autocompletion and other stuff, and it should be self-contained, because sometimes I don't want to distribute my whole home environment configuration. I want only my shell configuration to be on the remote host, and that is why I want it to be as self-contained as possible and doesn't rely on any external utilities as much as possible. And here you can see a very simple prompt, just a green arrow, actually bracket, triangle bracket probably, and it has some features. It's very simple because I prefer to be my whole working environment to be as less destructive as possible and attention friendly. That is why, for example, even the directory not displayed in my prompt, and it displayed in Tmax right here in the right corner. And the only thing that you will see in my prompt changed if, for example, I will call something that will return error, I mean different from 0 status code, and on the right side you will see the status code in square brackets. And also, if I will launch something like guix environment minus ad hoc fish, for example, you will see that another blue bracket appeared here, and now I have fish available in my environment, and I can leave the environment, and now I don't have fish in my environment, and I don't have this blue bracket. It's just signals or shows me that I'm inside some virtual environment. And I also have a special alias which do the same. It creates a virtual environment with some packages inside it. For example, it can be fish and something else, bash. Actually, I have bash in my system profile. That is why it won't add any new packages to my system, but it created a new profile, as you can see here. And if I will run it one more time, it won't repeat the process of creation profile, but will just spawn a new shell with all the packages that I need. Also, actually there are much more shells than Unix shells, and it's true, eShell is pretty good, but there are some other interesting shells. For example, Babashka, it's closure-based shell, also very Lisp flavored, and many other interesting projects. Okay, going back to my shell prompt. Another option, another case in which you will see that my shell changed. I will increase font for you. If I log in with sudo, and now who am I? Now I'm root, and you can see that shell has this red arrow, red bracket instead of green one. And it also has blue bracket because we are inside environment. And if I type sudo without my virtual environment, it will be only red arrow here. That's pretty much it about prompt. It's very minimalistic, but still shows the most important information. At least I think that it's most important for me information. Now, for example, we saw our try alias, and I want to get after completion. You already see some gray text that shows some possible completions, but I want to see all the completions, and I will press tab for that, and you will see it will spawn a search and will pick the first argument and will make a search mode enabled. And now I want to find Emacs and maybe Emacs next. And now I can see that there are few more packages around Emacs next. It's very slow because I'm streaming right now probably, but it's relatively okay when I use it. Actually, it's pretty quite fast. Okay, I picked the package that I wanted, and now I can start shell with Emacs next inside it. It will download it, will create profile, and will provide me with new virtual environment. Pretty cool. And what is important here is how completion works. Every tab completion will spawn a menu, and it will start a search, and right here I can just start typing and we'll go to the special to the first item that conforms the search terms. But here you can see that I can type IG and it will find designed word here, but I also can go to the next completion by typing Ctrl S. Actually, my zshrc file disables sending a stop signal by Ctrl S, and now I can use it as a hotkey. And as you can see, typing Ctrl S a few times, I can go between different options which contain substrings that I used in search. And also I can go back with Ctrl R and pick this option if I want. The same works for the history. Ctrl R is backward search in the history, and I can type it few more time to get previous completions, and I can type Ctrl S to go forward in search history. Pretty useful. I use it quite a lot. We talked about completion, we talked about search, Ctrl S forward search, Ctrl R backward search. In completion we always have a menu, and we can start typing and search activated by default. And if we don't want to use our search, we can type Ctrl N, Ctrl P to go back and forth. But if we want to search, we type Ctrl S or probably Ctrl R to search forward or backward, and type a search term and go between completions. Also, very useful hotkey is Ctrl C, which cancel everything. Actually, it sends a sigint signal which clears the prompt and gives an ability to start from the empty prompt. Also, another important key binding is when we started to complete something, we can type Ctrl-G to disable the completion, or if we typed Alt-X to execute some command but we want to stop it, we type Ctrl-G, the same key for Emacs for abort. Good. And another important command, for example, we completed with tab. If it has only one option, it won't spawn menu, it will just complete it. And now I want to go back to the state just before the completion. I type Ctrl/, which just undo the last operation. The same works, for example, for completion. I typed tab and it automatically picked first option, which popped up in this completion menu. And I want to go back, I can use Ctrl-G or Ctrl/, which will do the same operation. We will cancel the completion. Pretty much it about cancel and undo commands. We talked about search and a little more about completion. You can see a gray text here, and the reason for this gray text because I have Autosuggestions plugin enabled, and it shows some completion based on two things: my history and possible arguments for our utility. For example, if I will type guix, it will show previous invocation of guix command. But if I will type, for example, guix-g, it will show guix-gc, garbage collector. I never typed it in this history, but it still propose this option to me. If I type --, it shows version, and for example, let's take some command that I didn't use yet. I didn't use htop command, but it still shows some options for htop. If I type tab, it shows all possible completions. Maybe not all in some cases, but in most cases it shows all completions. And it always shows the item from the history here, the last item from the history, or in case there is no history with such command, it shows a first option available in lexicographical order. Okay, that's all about completion. And mostly all about my shell configuration in action. Let's take a look a little at source code, and we'll go to the end of our stream. I need my project, RDE project, and here I need zshrc configuration. As you can see, it's just less than 3 pages of text. Most of the configuration is for completion. Another feature that I forgot to show, for example, when you type kill, it provides you with all the processes that you can kill, and you can find, for example, Emacs. Oops. For some reason, by default, it contains Emacs here, and if I type enter, it will kill the Emacs. Pretty useful You don't need to pgrep or do something else to find the PID of the process. You can just type kill, completion, and search for the program that you want to kill. Yep. And the first page mostly contains the configurations related to completion. It's a menu completion, some fuzzy completion, completion for kill command, and some colored output for completions. For example, if I type ls, you can see that it's pretty colored, the same way as ls command colored. After that, there's some configuration for prompt. It's pretty tiny, and it has a commented line which makes it behaves as a fish shell on Ctrl+C. It doesn't kill the current prompt, it just clears it. But I don't use it for now. Maybe later I will use, maybe not. Also, I set the cursor to be a vertical bar, set the rules for words, what you can count as a word and what you can't. And here you can see this great text with Autosuggestions. I can complete everything by typing Ctrl+E and going to the end of the line. But I also can use Alt+F for forward one word and complete only part of this stuff. And this configuration makes those jumps more granular. That means without this configuration, it will use very long names. For example, for now, Emacs next it's 2 words. Without this configuration, it will be 1 word and will be one jump, which not very convenient sometimes. Also some configuration related to history and help command. Oh, pretty nice feature actually. You typed something and now you forgot the options that you wanted to pass to this command. You type Alt-H and you can read the manual and go back to the state where this command already here. And also, for example, I type guix environment something, or let's take another command, git log something minus, and I forgot some options for this command. I can read the manual for git log, go out and continue typing something, read the manual one more time and go back. Very convenient. Nowadays I don't use shell too much, but sometimes it's still useful, and by default in RDE I will be using zshrc. Also, there another important theoretical knowledge about shells. Every user have the shell declared in pass. Oops, let me make it smaller. Every user has shell declared here. For example, you can see here my home directory and my shell here. But for it will be used for my login shell, but for interactive shell I prefer zsh, and that is why my shell variable will be equal to zsh pass, and every time I spawn a terminal, zsh will be spawned, not bash. And in many other cases zsh will be used too. Yep, that means you can just set a shell environment variable and you will be using it everywhere except the login. And even after login, you can put in bash rc just zsh to spawn zsh automatically if you want. That means you don't need to have system privileges to set your preferred shell. We also will take a look how everything works in terms of guix home here. Let's go to the config scm file, and we'll go to rd_zsh function. This function accepts rd_config, which is basically just a record with few values that we can use or may just omit and don't use them, and returns a list of services. Services in terms of guix system services or guix home services in our case. And you can see I create new service using simple service helper, which just extends home environment aware's service type with a value list of pairs, only a list of only one pair, which contains shell variable equal to the path to zsh. It used to make my interactive shell to be zsh, while my login shell is bash. Also, I have here zsh Autosuggestions service, which enables plugin and adds the configuration to my zshrc file. How it works? You probably already see my zshrc file, and it finished here with aliases. And if you go here, the only service related to zshrc configuration is actually home-zsh service type, which takes zsh configuration. I say to use xdg flavor. That means my configuration files won't go to the home directory, but they go with to .config/zsh folder. And I set only zshrc here and provide a list of one item, and this item just a content of zshrc file. That's it. And probably using such configuration we will get zshrc containing something from this file only. And if we take a look at our home folder, we see zsh env file only here, and it just sources zsh env file from .config directory. And let's take a look what inside this file. Inside this file we see that only z.dir set to actually this .config/zsh directory to make zsh read all the configuration files from this directory. And let's take a look at our zshrc file, which is actually a symlink to the store. And we will see our aliases here, but here we see some additional values. Where they come from? They come from two services declared here and here. Oh, actually only here. This one will go to another file. It will go to setup environment file in my guix home. Oops. Guix home setup environment file. You can see here, oops, shell file equal to zsh, this string added by this simple service. And our home-zsh Autosuggestions service doing, let me start REPL to be able to navigate between different files using go to definition of functionality. I evaluate namespace to make REPL aware of the directory where the model for zsh after suggestions based. It took some time, but now we're here, and this service is pretty simple. It just sets few variables that we saw earlier. Let's see it one more time. It sets just few variables right here in zshrc, and it also extends another service called zsh plugin manager, and zsh plugin manager basically takes a list of packages and adds to zshrc the following code: the variable which contains the path to zsh plugins, and for each plugin provided to this service, it stores this plugin to our shell. And here we can see setting the variable and sourcing all the plugins provided to plugin manager. Actually, we have only zsh after suggestions provided to this plugin manager. That is why we have only one source here, and it enables this plugin. If I remove this line or comment it out and make home reconfigure, it will take time because OBS and streaming is quite hungry on the CPU and makes all other commands very slow. Okay, while it compiling, I will open back my slides. We talked about all necessary features, and it actually built the home environment. And now if I spawn a new shell, you see that there is no gray text because there is no after suggestions plugin anymore in my zshrc configuration. And you can see nothing here, just plain zshrc file that I had in the directory with my RD source code. And we uncommented back, and after one more reconfiguration of my guix home, we will get back this plugin in our shell. Okay, that's it about zsh and my configuration, and also that's it about zsh service for guix home. You actually already can use it, but if you unsure, you can wait a little until we will merge guix home to the guix itself. If you relatively experienced user, join our early adopters call and start using guix home with our support, but you still need to spend some time and effort to configure it and maintain this configuration, but we will provide as much help to you as possible. Today we learned that shells are old, sometimes they are ugly. It's probably not the best programming language and not the best interface, but pretty widespread, and we need to respect it and utilize their capabilities and rely on them in many modern operating systems. As I said, you can join our early adopters of guix home, and reproducibility is cool. For now, I don't have to worry about breaking my operating system, losing all the time that I spent configuring it. I just can copy my configuration for operating system and for my home environment and instantiate the whole operating system with all the tweaks and the best defaults you can imagine for myself, and have it in just a few minutes. That's it for today. I'm glad you joined and hope you enjoyed. See you soon.